All right, guys, so we're starting off the day today at the NVIDIA Suite. NVIDIA building, it feels like everything here is NVIDIA, and we're going to go over a lot. So join me for the ride. Hey guys, I have Joe here with Capcom, and we are at the NVIDIA private suite checking out some of their latest tech. So take it away.
Yeah, hey everybody. Today we're taking a look at Pragmata. Have you heard of Pragmata before?
I have not.
Okay.
It
All
looks
right.
amazingly interesting, though.
Yeah. So Pragmata is a new sci-fi action adventure game coming from Capcom.
Okay.
It's releasing on April 24th, and I believe in the demos that you're going to see today, it's the only unreleased title. So we're showing off some new tech, something totally new. So the game is a sci-fi action adventure game where you play as Hugh, who's the astronaut-looking character here in the game, and he has the android Diana on his back. The game has an interesting twist where essentially you have to hack enemies before you can do any damage to them. It's kind of a mix of like using both sides of your brain during the combat, and comes up with like a really unique twist that keeps getting iterated on as you play through the game. The game is set on a lunar research station where the two protagonists have to escape from the station and find their way back to Earth. The game is built using the RE Engine, which is the engine that we use for a lot of our titles at Capcom. So you may have seen it in the Resident Evil titles.
Yeah.
Resident Evil Requiem also is using the RE Engine. Creates some really stunning visuals, just really high visual fidelity. And today what we're showing off is path tracing. We announced that path tracing is coming to Pragmata when it launches on April 24th. And essentially what you're seeing here with the two displays is the version with no ray tracing on the left side. On the right side, you're seeing it with path tracing on all the bells and whistles. So essentially what we're going to take you through today is kind of a demonstration of the tech. So you'll see the differences with path tracing on, and Marshall here from the NVIDIA team is going to,
Hey, Marshall.
to drive us. Yeah.
Cool.
So let's
Thank
go ahead
you.
and do it.
So path tracing is actually a very old, it's a mathematical concept of tracing the way that light moves through a scene. It's also referred to as like a Monte Carlo rendering method. Okay. So both ray tracing and path tracing are part of that same Monte Carlo rendering method family. And they are meant to simulate the way that light moves through a scene. It actually even predates computers. It was a mathematician that kind of like constructed this idea of ray tracing using sort of a grid outline, looking out his window, and then using that grid to kind of essentially trace where lights be on his pictures and paintings that he would do. It was very computationally expensive, so it was usually only used for like films and television where they would do, 3D rendering that was offline, very, very slow, took, minutes to even hours per frame to render. In 2018, when NVIDIA announced the RTX GPUs with the RTX 20 series Turing architecture, one of the major advancements was that we had acceleration hardware inside the GPU to run through a lot of those calculations much faster, and that made it possible to do real-time ray tracing for video games and for other things as well, but primarily interested in video games for that. And as we've continued to iterate on our GPUs and this technology, we now have the power to do real-time path tracing as well.
Nice.
We consider path tracing versus ray tracing features. You might be familiar with ray tracing in games where maybe it's ray trace reflections or ray trace shadows.
Right.
Like one particular feature, maybe two,
Yeah.
that it's using for that. Whereas path tracing is the entire scene is being rendered completely using this Monte Carlo rendering method,
Okay,
rather
nice.
than layering technologies on top of a rasterized or traditionally rendered
Okay. All right, so let's check out the game.
Yeah, sure. So, as Joe said, we're using this to kind of do like a teaching moment to kind of talk about traditional rasterized rendering methods on the left side here versus path tracing on the right side. So we're going to kind of look at some of these details and see what this brings to the scene.
So I can definitely already see that it's much darker on the left.
Yeah, so that's because with path tracing, every light contributes to light in the scene. Whereas with a traditional rasterized method, a lot of this light is baked in during the development stage. So the lights maybe aren't as dynamic, or maybe only some lights are contributing to the light level, versus this, where every light source is part of that light contribution.
Okay.
So it does tend to make a scene look a little bit brighter.
Nice.
But in this instance, we're going to look at other details as well, such as shadows and reflections.
Okay.
That you'll see as well. So we're going to go over here real quick. And I want you to look first at the left side here. So this is using screen space ambient occlusion and shadow map technologies, which has been used for quite a long time in video games to kind of ground objects in a scene and give you that sense of shadowing and darkness behind, these objects that are strewn about the ground here.
Yeah.
Specifically around this paper, you'll notice that it has like the suggestion of a shadow underneath this paper here.
Right.
But it kind of looks like the paper's almost floating off the ground. It's not quite like placed directly on that surface. And then also, if you look at the shadow that's underneath this container, it almost looks like the shadow is slightly smaller than the container. It actually kind of like pokes out a little bit under that corner there.
Yep.
And on this side, we have path traced shadows. So we have these nice, crisp, defined shadows under the paper here. Really looks like these papers are placed onto the ground. Maybe a little floating because, obviously paper would be absolutely flat to the ground, but limitations of some of the tools that you have to build these scenes oftentimes.
Yeah.
But on this container, for example, even where it kind of curves under to form
you can see that.
You can see that shadow is very well defined there.
Definitely.
And it's detailed enough that there's a handle here, and you can see that handle also present in the shadow.
Nice. Okay. And all right.
So as you look through the demo, you're going to see that all of these objects are going to be showing those improved shadows, even including the character shadows. So if you look at this character shadow here, you can see there's a lot of fidelity on that, where you can see all the defined character's features shadowed on the ground there.
Compared to
versus this one, which is using that shadow map technology again. It's very fuzzy.
Yeah.
As they move, you may also see that it kind of like pops in and out, flickers around the edges.
Yeah.
Very soft there. I'm gonna take a quick drink of water. 1 second. Next, we're going to talk about reflections. We're going to talk about a lot of reflections.
All right.
But along this wall, we have this metal panel wall. And the awesome thing about this game that they've built is, since it's set on this lunar research base, there's so much metal, plastic, and glass materials that actually behave differently when it comes to reflectivity.
Okay.
So when you look at this metal wall, you can see that it's got like a little hex pattern in there, and it's maybe a little, it's not quite mirror perfect smooth.
Right.
So the reflection that we have here, dynamic reflection,
it's beautiful.
It's a little soft. It's not quite a perfect mirror sharp image.
It looks amazing.
And on this side, they're using a combination of cube map, which is a static 360-degree capture of the scene that they then use to sort of, communicate that this is a reflective surface.
Yeah.
But it's not dynamic.
So you don't see the character.
Yeah, you don't see the character. You don't see other things moving through the scene. And you'll also see, it's more obvious in some of the other scenes, but it's not as high res as the path trace reflection here. They'll also use screen space reflections to kind of like give the sense that there are dynamic objects in the reflection. Mm-hmm. But particularly on a third-person game such as this, you'll often see artifacts that appear because of, it's not showing the front of the character. It's oftentimes showing like a part of their arm in that reflection and not like the full character body.
Okay.
If we go over to this next spot here, we have a slightly different metal surface. So if you look closely, it's actually slightly sharper in that reflection.
Yeah.
So as I was saying, that different materials behave a little differently for the reflection.
Yeah.
But this is also like this stamped sheet metal panel thing. So if I move the camera around, the point where all these kind of like cross over, you'll see that like it'll duplicate across all those different panels.
Yeah.
Showing that like
different angles,
slightly different angles, reflecting back at the camera lens. And so it kind of just like this faceted reflection kind of thing.
It looks beautiful.
On this side, it's very challenging to do that. So they treat it as a single plane, and it just has that one cube map reflection again present there for that.
Still looks good, just not
still looks
as
good. Yeah, but this is just showing a lot more detail, much more natural, realistic lighting.
Yeah.
All right, next, we're going to go around to here. So we have this transparent pane of glass. So obviously, you can see through that glass, see the other side of the room, but also see the reflection of the character here. And the reflection of this panel that's display that's on the wall here is also present in the reflection, right? So you could see that there.
Cool.
Comparing that to this side where it's again using a transparent cube map reflection, you can see it has that screen in there, but not the character.
Because it's static, right?
Yeah. And again, what I was saying before is that this is a much lower resolution than what you'll get with the path traced version right there.
That's awesome.
We're gonna go to the next room here real quick. So I really like using curved glass to talk about RT reflections because there's no way to fake it. You have to ray trace or path trace them to make curved glass reflections or curved surface material reflections work correctly.
Okay.
So you might be familiar in some other games where they use like a planar reflection. So they pick like one flat spot and they'll just reproject the scene underneath.
Yeah.
But you can't do that for curved surfaces. And you oftentimes can only pick one plane in the level that you can use for that planar reflection.
Okay.
But in this case, what we have here is on this vending machine, it's this flat glass panel that then starts to curve into itself at this point.
Oh, yeah,
here.
okay.
So we get like this distortion. So you can see his legs are reflected here, but it's like scrunched up, a little distorted there.
Yeah.
Sort of like a funhouse mirror kind of thing, right?
Yeah. And
on this side, It's just using a cube map reflection again, similar to what you saw already.
Right.
Not showing the dynamic character. It's relatively low resolution capture of the environment.
Yeah.
You've probably also noticed as I've been moving around that the character on the back here, this is Diana, she has this really awesome strand-based hair.
Right.
And so
That's what
as
caught my eye
I
about it.
move around, right, you'll see a lot of that dynamic movement, and that hair is like reacting very naturally.
Yeah.
And as I jump, like it's kind of like lofting into the air and all that kind of stuff.
That's amazing.
But I'm also going to point out that that hair is present in the reflections as well. So you can see her hair here, and as I jump, you can just make out that her hair is like animating even in the reflections there. So even this hair is present in what we call the BVH, the bounding BVH, it's bounding volume hierarchy. Okay. So that's like the the engine side. The engine understands that these objects exist within this 3D space.
Awesome.
And that's how it will do this path tracing or ray tracing work in all these different games.
Okay. And then over here, if you
Over
did
here,
the jumping.
it still has the strand-based hair solution. It's not specific technology that's related to path tracing.
Okay.
But it's just that this hair is present in the
reflection.
path traced view.
Okay.
And if you want to, that hair as well is also used in Resident Evil Requiem. But it was initially developed for Diana in this game. But they then used it for Grace Ashcroft in Resident Evil Requiem. That's going to be coming out as well.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can kind of see like the tech sharing between the teams, and again, we use RE Engine for multiple titles, so a lot of the advancements that are made in one title get used in other titles.
Okay.
We're going to move over to the last room here. So I was talking about how there's different surface materials and they react differently to reflectivity. So I'm going to just draw your attention to this wall here, where along this wall we actually have 3 materials in very close proximity. If you look here, the shadow reflection here that you can see is a little softer than that surface right there. It's a little sharper. So even, just within a space of a couple feet of each other, you have different material properties for reflections that show that. And then again, here we have this transparent surface. You can just make out the character as he's walking by in that as well.
Oh, wow, yeah.
We're going to walk over here and talk about another curved surface reflection. Here's this helmet sitting on the table, and you can just make out the reflection of the character right there. As I move around, you can see that responding.
That's cool.
And then finally, we have this last shot that I really like, where you get like the stacked reflection. So on the back panel there he is reflected in the wall.
Yeah.
Between the wall and the camera, we then have this pane of glass that also shows him reflected right there.
Yeah.
His head moving around. So you get that the full scene is present on both of those reflections.
Nice. And what GPU is this being played on right now?
These are running on 5090s.
5090,
so
okay.
RTX 5090s. This is a 4K panel, so we have a 4K output resolution.
Okay.
DLSS for both of these systems is set to balanced mode as the input, so we're trying to keep those as close.
Balanced, okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
And so one of the reasons that we're so excited for path tracing coming to more titles is, as you play through a game with the rasterized view, there are details that you'd have to ignore in order to maintain your suspension disbelief on these games and treat them as real environments, because shadows aren't quite right, reflections aren't quite right.
Right.
They're close. You can see that there are supposed to be shadow there, but like the paper in the beginning or the reflections on the walls, if it's not completely accurate, you have to kind of like ignore that as you play through the game. And for the developers, they spent so much time and effort building these environments, building these character models, all these different assets that they have, and we want to show off their work as much as possible.
Okay.
So path tracing means that that player can see all these different things. And they don't have to turn their brain off to certain details. And they can just take it all in and experience it as if it's a natural, vibrant, lifelike world.
So path tracing along with DLSS will definitely improve your gaming experience.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Okay, perfect.
Do you have any other questions or things you want to look at more closely?
I think this looks great. I love, the game looks amazing. And of course the technology is beautiful, but it's amazing how much of a difference it makes. Reflections, everybody always talks about reflections, and it's tremendous. It's not only reflections, but it actually improves the detail.
Yes.
With that enabled. So that's awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.